Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh, and welcome to another episode of Mental Health Matters, where we openly talk about mental health. My name is Harpal Singh, and I'm going to be your host for today. And today we've got a very interesting topic, anxiety and depression. And today we talk about the difference between what anxiety and depression is and how things are. We've got two wonderful guests sitting alongside me today. We've got Gavin Crisp, a consultant psychotherapist, registered social worker, a senior lecturer, a clinical supervisor, and also working with the leading university, contributing to a CBT program for aspiring therapists specializing with young children and people. So welcome aboard, Gavin. Thank you for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. And also we've got the wonderful Balipaji here from Journey of Compassion, the CEO. So welcome coming back, and thank you for coming along to share your wisdom with us.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa,
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So today we're going to be talking about anxiety and depression, and both today we'll be going through the segments with us. So Gavin, just want to touch base with you. What are the causes of anxiety and depression in young people?
So, again, just before I answer it, I just want to explain what anxiety is. So, anxiety is a normal stress response that is kind of been built into us as human beings when we sense any kind of danger. And depression is like a persistent state of low mood, feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness. And with both of these, it can be normal to experience short periods of these symptoms. However, when it's more persistent and longer term is when we call it more of a disorder or an issue. So some of the main causes for anxiety in young people, anxiety and depression may be life events such as issues like bullying at school, for example. It could be family dynamics or family issues. There could be traumatic experiences where they've experienced something while they're out in the community, such as a violent assault, for example. With family dynamics, it could be parental separation, it could be grief, loss. Things like social media can have an impact as well. There's also things around exam stress, for example, things within school pressure, and then developmental changes that young people go through, especially transitioning from a child to a teenager and then a teenager into a young adult. Again, there's a lot of hormonal changes that can make your mental health feel imbalanced. And young people might experience new feelings or new emotions that they're not familiar with and don't feel fully equipped to deal with them due to the life stage they're at.
So it's quite a personal little journey they're going on. And but you just bring in for young children, that you've worked with several young people as well. Have you seen anxiety and depression work in them?
I think I'm noticing it more now, and that's probably because of the lens I'm looking through and the work that I'm doing now. I probably wouldn't have noticed it as much if I was to go back 10 years ago. And because I've grown more of an understanding about it myself, even though anxiety was something I did go through and suffer with, previously, and then it came back after many years, but you almost forget about your own experiences, and then when doing this work, then you almost miss it. But now, in the more recent years, because of my understanding has developed, it becomes a lot clearer, and you start to see it more and more, even within the community.
So how does it develop your understanding? What steps did you take to get to this new understanding?
I was forced to understand it. And so I always say, even though we're talking about such a serious topic, it's okay to have a light approach as well. So for myself, again, when Gavin was going through all the different reasons for why anxiety can develop in somebody, and again, understanding that where it's a natural response to certain situations in life, But I'm sure here we're referring to it, anxiety, in not when it's more of a natural response when it's needed, and potentially when it becomes more generalized. So where you're experiencing it more often than even needed. So again, for myself, it was going through experiencing different episodes of life when I was younger, and it originally manifested as anger, but a lot of it was coming from anxiety due to different life situations that I went through. And then wasn't until it came back. So I was okay for a while, and then it came back was when I was forced to look into what it is, and then I came to understand how fight, flight, and then what goes on in your system, what's going on in your body, what's happening, why is it happening. So I learnt about it for myself, and then when I gained that understanding was that, well, I'm doing this work in the community anyway, trying to, bring to light the Guru's wisdom. And then I just continued saying that's another way of serving. Whatever I've just learned about myself, I'm going to continue to share that. And then and then people come to know, oh, he understands this now. And then they come to you automatically to tell you about that and to speak to you about that.
It's an interesting point you made about knowing and not knowing. Gavin, we'll come back to you about young people and children, especially coming from an adult or a parent understanding. What is the difference between anxiety and depression, and can they coexist in children and young people?
Yeah, so anxiety is often very much fear driven. So if you think about emotions such as fear, depression is more driven by emotions such as sadness and can lead to feelings of like emptiness or worthlessness. Anxiety can often be quite future orientated. So again, concerned about what might happen later on, next week, next year, 10 years time. Often very much about what if this happens, what if that happens in the future. Depression can be future orientated, but often it's very much linked to ruminating over past events and overthinking about how you might have been perceived or how you've performed, but very much around that kind of low energy, lacking motivation. Anxiety is very much high alert. Again, kind of going into your fight or flight, you can be almost scanning for the danger, whereas low mood depression is very much body going into hibernation mode.
Just for those who are watching the show, especially younger people, can you just explain a bit more about the fight and flight?
Yeah, so fight or flight is your body's natural response to stress or danger. So, what happens when you're in a situation? So, for example, if you've ever stepped out off the footpath into the road and you didn't see the car coming and you immediately jump back, you might feel almost a wave go over your body. And that's your fight or flight kicking in. So again, even before you've had a chance to think about it, you've jolted back because your body's being pumped with chemicals such as adrenaline and cortisol to get you out of that situation, get you moving quicker. So it's any situation where you're in danger and you feel like you've got to escape it or fight it. So again, back when we were cavemen and women, back in those days, we would be living in quite a threatening environment quite often. So again, if we're going to be attacked, we would then have the energy to fight and rescue or save ourselves or escape the situation. In modern day, we live in a relatively safe community in the UK. So thinking about, we live in societies, we've got our communities, we've got our homes, or some of us have got our homes. We don't actually need our fight or flight as regularly as we did back then. So our brains will almost create danger for us. So social danger, for example, like how did I come across when I spoke or put my hand up in that lesson? Or what does my friend think of me when I lost at the football game, right? And it sets off our body's alarm system. So it's almost like I describe it to people like that smoke alarm you've got in your house that just goes off all the time, right? If you're burning a bit of toast, doesn't mean you're in danger, but the alarm's going off. So again, it's very much similar to what we were just talking about. Having that awareness of it can really de-escalate it. And anxiety and depression can coexist. So we call that comorbidity, and it's quite common for it to coexist. So if, for example, you've got a young person that's struggling with anxiety, they might avoid going to school. They might say, I can't go, and start to become homeschooled, which happens quite frequently. Whilst they're being homeschooled, they're not interacting with peers potentially or other people their age. And then they start to feel sad or not good enough, or why can't I do this? Or they might see people, kids at the park or people on social media socializing, and feel like they're missing out. And because they're not doing what they want to or fulfilling their needs and interests, they're then becoming quite sad, and sort of feeding into that negative narrative of not being good enough. So therefore then depression can start to take over.
So, in that sense, and I know from talking to quite a lot of people in our community, the Asian Punjabi Sikh community, a lot of kids will go through what you mentioned.
Yeah.
So I was wondering two things: what can we do, and more importantly, what can parents do? Because a lot of times parents feel, in the nicest way, the anxiety of their children and the depression. So, what signs? What can they do? How can they be helped?
So a big thing is to be gently challenging some of those intrusive thoughts or things that young people are sharing. Obviously, it's dependent on the young person sharing that information. So thinking about, having that space at home to talk, people having family time together that doesn't involve a device, actually spending time chatting around the dinner table if that still happens, but having the time to have that open and honest conversation. I'm very much a believer in role modelling as well. I've got a teenage son myself, and I will talk to him about when I'm having a bad day and that's okay and it's normal. If I'm having like quite extreme emotions about things, I will talk about it. Again, kind of breaking that stigma down and normalising it is really important. I think encouraging them to continue to do and fulfill their interests, even if the anxiety or the intrusive thought is telling them not to, it's building them up to do things. And finally, kind of just rationalising and reasoning. So often, if we're struggling with anxiety or depression, our mind might be saying things again, that alarm system, you're in danger, something bad's going to happen. A good question might be, has that ever happened before? And if it does happen, what could we do about it to try and problem solve it and rationalise it with your child? But making sure, first and foremost, that you're open, non-judgmental, honest, and really encouraging of having that conversation in your home in a safe place with your child.
Thank you. Some really inspiring words. Everybody, I'm coming to you. Gavin mentioned creating that safe space at home. Parents talking to their children if they see they're going through anxiety or depression, or having that quality time. What advice would you give to parents in that situation?
So one of the things that I'm sure we've all heard growing up as well is that it's powerful to pray together, like that saying, a family that prays together stays together. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. Again, it's creating a space where you can connect to each other, create a certain vibration where you get to have time out. You take a breath and you're maybe chanting the same thing, so you're creating a certain vibe. But then at the end of that, now that you've been able to create a certain environment, and that's why they would always say, for families to try and do our evening Bani together. So, the prayers, which is the Rahra Sahib. And if we're able to do that, it creates that space. But what I would say is to add to it is then, because now you've created that opportunity, and at the end of that, maybe then take that time. And if it's straight after that, if it's then dinner, and trying to at least having one meal a day together, and then taking that opportunity, because now you're ready at you're probably a bit calmer, you've taken that breath, and now you can go into a conversation and ask the questions and see if you can get a flow of conversation going. But one thing, again, I find that's important is what I'm always trying to do is a quality that's highlighted so much. And these are universal qualities, and I'm not saying that they're only exclusive to the Guru's wisdom. And it's Sunya, which is to listen. And it gives us this list. It says, well, through listening, you can achieve this, you can achieve this. So it talks about Sunya, Duk Bab Ka Nas, that you can get rid of so much suffering just by listening properly. So constantly trying to hear things. So little, remarks or little things that they might be saying. Like, I've got a 12-year-old, he's actually going through puberty right now. It's just changed, his voice has changed, and there's a lot going on, and it's just constantly observing and listening out the little things that they might say. My younger one, he's, going through so much, tuition at the moment, preparing for a grammar test. So there's a lot going on in the house. And then we've got a 2-year-old, to throw into the mix of all that craziness. So I think the Sunya is so important when you're listening out more consciously. And then when that opportunity has been created in the day, is whatever you've picked up on as well, try and engage that conversation in a safe way.
I want to pick up on what I call the Punjabi father figure. Head of the household, doesn't speak, goes to work, earns whatever he does, comes home, does what he needs to, eats and goes to sleep, doesn't have much time for his wife and his children. What advice, both of you being fathers, and I believe we're from the same generation, where you only talk to the father if you're in trouble, kind of thing. What kind of messages, what kind of strategies can we provide parents to help young people and children to listen, to understand for you? So open the question up to both of you. I'm not here to want to hear both your sides of the story, especially if it comes to a Punjabi man who's head of the house. And going back to caveman theory, it was just like...
I was so glad you didn't only give the caveman example, and you gave a modern example as well, about stepping into a road and there might be a car coming. Everybody always comes up with the T-Rex or the bear, and you made it a lot more relatable, so thank you for that.
What practical strategies can you guys think of?
I think you raised a really good point about listening. It can be so easy not to listen, or life is busy, and we're also living in a modern era where we're almost expected to be accessible all of the time. And I think taking note of your own mental health first. It's like what they say when you go on an aircraft, you put your own oxygen mask on first in an emergency before you respond to your children. And I think it's important to do that and have that self-awareness for you to be able to listen, because if you're overwhelmed yourself, it's going to be quite hard to notice things. We're human beings, we make mistakes, we're not perfect. But then it's around creating that relationship. When you've got teenage children, it can be quite challenging. When you've got little children, as you know, that can be quite challenging. And it's around how do you respond and manage to all of those needs. And I think you've almost got to have your own house in order, if that makes sense. So have your own mind in order and support your own needs first, because you can't always be the best at everything. And I think it's it's noticing that and being aware of it.
Yeah, so one thing, when you was, given that little description of some of the fathers that we may have grown up with, and again, for them, that was them giving their time to their family, was working hard, and for them, that's how they were contributing. And then doing the other stuff, some of them may not have had those skills to ask those opening questions and create that communication, because they were surviving, and all they knew how to do was, well, I'm going to provide and I'm going to try and build a house. So that was them. They've done their part in their head. So that was very similar for me. My growing up was that dad's tired now. He's going to come. He's going to watch the
Don't disturb him.
news. He's going to he's going to have his roti, and But we knew he was very hard working. But to be able to have a deeper dialogue, it's not really going to happen. So taking that on board, that's not how I wanted it. But I had more of an open relationship than with my mum, even though she's like born in 1950. I don't know, it struck gold somehow. I was able to have talks with her. But now what I've tried to do is, again, obviously we can, like you said, there's a lot, we're trying to manage a lot. So we're going to have those moments. One thing I've tried to do personally is that there's a line again from the Guru's wisdom that I absolutely love, and it's not highlighted enough. And it talks about these 4 specific things that people generally think you have to run away from if you're on a spiritual path. And the first thing that's noted there is hasandia, which translates to laughing. And it says at the end of the line, these are the things you don't have to run away from. So hasandia and then kelandia. And the second one is to be playful. So often you think somebody that's religious, they're going to be serious, they're not going to laugh a lot. But it can be quite the opposite. Because the closer you get into your soul, the lighter you are feeling. So hasandia, kelandia, I try and be quite playful. And they know, but I can be serious as well. I contemplate a lot. It's part of my work. But then just being silly, rolling around with them, saying silly stuff, sometimes just meaningless things. But then that creates that opportunity for them to be able to be more open. And having them note, well, maybe dad's not somebody that is always shouting. So it's probably easier to tell him something as well. But at the same time, kind of finding that balance, so that's one approach I've taken, is to be that dad that silly, roll around on the floor with them, say silly stuff, and then that creates an opportunity for them to be able to open up.
So, laughing, playing, being silly, fantastic from a Birubani perspective. Obviously, some of it you probably will do in a clinical perspective, but I just want to get your thoughts on what you would do with young people and children who are going through anxiety, depression from a more of a clinical perspective. How would they work with you? What can be done and what's expected?
Yeah, so it really varies, and I guess it's hard to be super specific because it depends on the individual that's in the room with me. However, I'm a accredited CBT therapist. So CBT stands for cognitive behavioural therapy. So basically, some fancy words for thoughts and actions. Yeah. So it goes on the basis of supporting young people to change the way they think or perceive things and the way they respond to things. So it's a leading kind of evidence-based treatment for children and young people and adults with anxiety disorders and depression. And it tends to be very much goal-driven. So one of the things that I'd focus on initially is looking at goals, what they want to achieve. It's formulation-driven. So formulation is like almost drawing a bit of a map. So trying to establish and understand what's going on and where all the bits fit together, like a bit of a jigsaw that we try and sort out together. And as part of that map, then would determine how the therapy might go ahead. So what sort of things we might need to focus on. So a really like simple example might be somebody comes to see me and they are really scared of dogs, for example, and it's impacting their life to the degree where they feel like they can't leave the house anymore because they're scared they're going to see a dog. So the first thing I might do is a lot of kind of something we call psychoeducation, which is educating the young person and the family around what anxiety is, what this fear is, why that fear might be being maintained and worsening over time. And then we do something called graded exposure, where again, this isn't kind of throwing somebody in at the deep end. It's gradually building up to that fear because it's being driven by avoidance. So the more they're avoiding it, the more they're feeling anxious about it. It's almost like fear of the unknown. So we might build up to that with something called an exposure ladder, and we think about it step by step. So it might just start with looking at pictures of different dogs, to going and looking at dogs from a distance, to gradually going and touching a dog or stroking a dog, wherever that young person wants to get to. So that might be a typical example of working with a child or young person with a dog phobia. However, there are lots of different anxiety presentations that would require different kind of intervention. However, CBT tends to be the go-to and something that you'd be quite familiar with if you went to visit your GP or healthcare professional. It tends to be a first line of treatment due to its success and research behind it.
Just want to say, coming to the end of our show, and once again, Gavin, thank you for coming in and sharing your expert knowledge. Really value your words of wisdom, are always fascinating. How you bring everything together is it's awesome. Big thank you to both of you guys for coming in
Thank
and
you.
sharing your knowledge. And Sangat, I just want to say to you, working on young people and children, anxiety, depression, it happens, it's happening. Please talk to them. And like, if you get time after school, at work, and if it's getting quite bad, speak to an expert like Gavin. See what we can do and best you can support them. Because if you don't support them, they're going to struggle. Until next time, please take care of yourself and take care of each other. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.